Greetings, it's episode 29. Well, hello and welcome back. Big week this week. I'm having a go at wiring in a Motogadget M-Unit Blue. Purpose of that is to get, purpose of the day rather, is to get the starter motor, turn the flywheel so I can prime the engine after putting oil in it and get the ignition going so I can get spark to the plugs. If I can do that, that's great. Next after that is rig up a fuel system, get some fuel at the carbs, and let's try and get the thing turned over. So, let's see how far we get today. On with it. Okay, oil is always a controversial subject. I'm using this. Don't really mind what your preference is. This is mine. And our climber book, which is very bright. I'll just alter the white balance. We're an engine oil without an oil cooler, oil changing filter, 2.25 litres. Cool. Okay, I've marked 1.25 on here, and I'll do it in two chunks. So I'm watching paint dry, ain't watching oil pour. It's on the money, isn't it? Right, you really have to start these off with a wiring diagram, and this is mine, version 175 about. For the first bit of this, let's just ignore the ignition system. Right, so task one is to get the starter motor turning so that the flywheel turns. Okay, we know the starter motor works because we did it on a previous video. Right, so we need to put the battery on the bike. We're going to put the M-Unit on the bike. We need an ignition switch, and I've got my original switch here. We need a starter button there, and I've taken the button off the little Revival 3-button jobby. So I've just taken the button off there. Look, I'm wired in alive and on earth. And we are going to put the battery on, earth the battery. Starter motor's already in the bike. We're going to rig the cable from the positive to the positive terminal, and then we're going to rig the starter terminal to the starter element of the M-Unit. Ignition switch goes from the positive to the lock, and the starter button goes from the start to the earth. How hard can that be? Right, we've gone handheld for this. So I've put a very scientific piece of wood across the frame and set the battery on it just to keep it flat and secure and close to where I'm working. I've earthed the battery to the casing with a strap. Okay, this was earthed to the gearbox, I think, but that's not on the bike at the moment. So I've just earthed that to the engine casing, and the positive lead, which is this dark one here, leads into the starter motor positive terminal there. Yep, groovy. Right, now I'm going to pop the unit in its place. 1 second. Okay, for the purpose of this little rig up, I'm going to mount the device there, utilising one of these holes. The powder coat has made it so there's no bare metal, so I have actually drilled that out a little bit to give a bit of bare metal for the bolt to get some purchase on. This is a self-tapping hole, but it's tight enough for the bolt to screw into it. So me just get that on there. I'll put the nut and bolt under it anyway, just because I'll lose them otherwise. Right, so next thing I need to do is attach the positive battery to that terminal there. I am actually going to put another ground on here just so I can ground some of the bits of cable to it as I carry on. So I've just got a little ground cable here, literally just a there you go. And then I'm going to put this positive on there. Actually, I need to put the positive on there for for the ignition switch as well. So put that on. Oops, shit. So let me just took that out of the way. So I'll just tie this down so I've got the positive to the battery and the first bit of ignition switch. So the way you attach these little things is you on this new unit blue you push them down. There's a little clip there. I'll zoom in, you can see it. Yeah, so these little clips here, you simply push them down with a screwdriver, pop your wire in, and that's your connection made. That's my ignition. Second part of the ignition goes to the mains power. So if I turn that on, boom, we have power. Okay, so ignition key goes to the positive and to the lock terminal. I have a turn my ignition. Once we set up, and we're on. So that works. Great stuff. Okay, the next task then, and you can't quite read it there, but they're here. These two terminals at the beginning are marked start, and they go to the starter motor. And what we have here actually is, if I can move it down, it is a two into one. So it's two wires into one connector. I guess because of the size of the load it's carrying. One. This old chestnut, eh? Two. And then this end goes on the connector on the starter motor. Do you remember that? If I could just turn this, you'll see it. Do you remember this post here? So you've got the mains, So you've got the lead to the positive terminal of the battery, and then the starter motor connector. On. Excellent. Okay, all we need now is a starter button. Starter button. The second one in here says start. That's a rubbish connection. Let's just look at that better. Get that better. There you go. And this one goes to earth. Do you remember the earth we put on the this ground here? So we'll just ground those together. In a very temporary way. So, what should happen now is, if I turn the ignition on, we get the power. If I hit the button, it should fire the starter motor, which it does. And what I'll just show you actually quickly as well, when I'm doing that, when it's fires the starter motor, obviously it'll turn that, and those things will work as well. Okay, this next bit is a little bit more complicated. So we need the ignition wire to go to the coil. A second version of that wire needs to go from the coil to the ignition control module, which is in turn connected to the knee bone, etc. Now, after much mucking about, and you can see I've got these, changed these over. Brown is the earth, green goes on that wire, and black goes on that wire. What does it even mean? Let me show you. This is the ignition control unit. I labelled it. And this has a connector on the end with 3 wires, which are black, brown, and a kind of a green and blue stripes. Okay, and this goes to the ignition bean can thing down there. There's a connector on the end. So that's just stock. But these fellas here, these 3 wires, need to be connected properly to the solenoid. If I just zoom up a touch. Okay, I've mounted the solenoid back on the bike, and I've added that's that cable I put in last week. I've added an earth grounding cable just to the bolt at the back of that. This is its original position. This is where the ignition control module went, and I'm going to ground that as well. You can see I've got a little grounding wire. So I'm going to mount the ignition control unit back in its original position. Really unsure about the grounding here. I have chased this thread out. It's been powder coated with a tap, but I'll be honest with you, I'm not overly impressed, or I'm not overly sure it's going to actually ground properly. And so we're going to use this little temporary ground just to make sure, for the benefit of this exercise, we have an actual proper solid ground that we're happy with. Good. Okay, back to our diagram then. We need an ignition wire which goes from the ignition point on the M unit into the coil, but also bounces out into that green connector. To that, I've made a a cable that bounces out. Cool. Okay, I'll start by finding my green connector, which is that one. And then one of those goes on to the far post. The other end will go into my ignition. Do that in a second. Okay, the other post goes on the brown wire, which is that one. Sorry, on the black wire, which is that one. And then finally, I've got an earth cable somewhere. There it is. This is one that I've grounded to the engine. Goes on the brown wire on there, like so. Then this wire goes on the ignition output of the M unit. Let's look at that. Okay, the ignition one is third one down. See that? Swap them over. Yeah, oh, third one down, that one. Super good. Okay, next then I need to connect the HT leads. I've got one with the spark plugs in already. So connect the HT leads to those. One. Two. Right. Now then. Look at that bloody spaghetti. Right. Now what's going to happen? Turn the ignition on. It will power it all up. When I hit the starter button here, the starter motor will whir. Hurrah. And when I ground these pair of spark plugs, which I'll do on the cylinder, we should see some sparks. Let's try that. Okay, we have light. And we have sparks. Let me give you a close-up of sparks. Watch here. Hit me starter button. We have sparks. Job done. Okay, quick recap then of this little drawing. We have a very dark image. Better? Okay, so battery. We've earthed the battery to the engine casing. We've got positive supply into the M unit, positive supply to the pole and the starter motor. We've got a ignition switch which goes from the positive of the M unit to the starter slot on the M unit. We've got a double starter cable going to the starter post. Whoops, and the yellow thing down there. Okay, then we've got the ignition post, ignition cable going to the ignition control unit, which is bouncing into the coils and out again. We've got this earthed. We've got the HT leads out of the coils onto the spark plugs, and we get a spark. Groovy. Pleased with that. Well, that's where my starter button came from, by the way, just so you know. Okay, we have a spark, and now we need fuel, and this is the original thing I took off the bike. I'm not going to put the main fuel tank back on. I'm just going to use this lawnmower petrol tank. Oh, it's got something in it. I've got a bit of fuel hose, and I'm going to just knock up a quick fuel supply, a quick temporary fuel supply. I want one of these T-pieces off here. So what I'll do, yeah, T-piece. Okay, so I've got that bit off there. Actually, I can use that, can't I? So I'll use this. That in there, and then 2 bits off that, 1 to each carb. Okay, so quick handheld on this. Okay, temporary fuel tank, just held on with a bit of wire into the fuel filter, which is off my original fuel system, although not original on the bike, into a splitter, and then into each carb. Fuel system. Now it's time to prime the system. By prime I mean get the oil flowing all the way around before we get a spark and light some fuel. So let's just turn the ignition on. That works. Oh. Get me starter button. Don't give the starter too much grief, get too hot. You can see a bit of oil here coming through. Yay, we're primed. So that's on both of the top studs on that side. But not on this side yet. Yay! Primed on that side as well. Pleased with that. Okay, rocker cover back on. And then spark plugs back in. Moment of truth. Fuel in. Ignition on. Good idea, actually. Start motor. Ooh. quite.
It's close.
Get in there. Battery might be dead.
Close down.
Yeah, it's getting there. Okay, let's try that again. Oh, crikey. Okay, test firing. Ignition on. Chokes on. Choke on. Happy with that? Well, that was a bit of a result. I will try and find a little clip of last time the engine was running, just so you can compare the two. Anyway, engine's running. That's great. I can crack on with the rest of it. Hope you liked this episode. Please like and subscribe and ask questions and all that good stuff. And I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.